There are certainly some questions about this Orioles team right now, but maybe the number one question on O's fans' minds is what are the O's going to do with Craig Kimbrel? Well, I'll try to answer that question and give you really the three possible solutions coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, August 27th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look at what are the O's going to do with Craig Kimbrel. It has certainly not been pretty in the second half of the season for Kimbrel. He has lost his closer role, and quite frankly, he's barely even been pitching in high leverage spots, but he's also the reliever in their bullpen with the most playoff experience and the best track record. So are they going to hold on to him? Are they going to try to make him the closer again? Are they going to cut him altogether? I'll run through the scenario right now and give you all the Orioles options and my take on the Kimbrel situation. And also we'll get to another Orioles bullpen waiver claim they made over the weekend, who probably won't help to the level that Kimbrel could, but could certainly get some outs for the Orioles down the stretch. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we're here on a Tuesday episode. I want to be fully transparent here at the top of the episode. I am recording this on Sunday, actually before the Orioles and Astros get started on Sunday Night Baseball. So not only is it over a day earlier, there's also going to be another game of baseball played in between when I'm talking right now in real time and when you are able to hear this episode. So when we do talk about Craig Kimbrel, I don't think, as I record right now, he'll pitch in the Sunday night game just because of his usage over the last week. But if he does, just know whatever he does Sunday night is not included in the stats I'm going to talk about here. And of course, if there's anything big with the O's, when we're back on Wednesday, we'll get to that on the podcast. But that is the big thing to talk about, is what are the O's going to do with Craig Kimbrel? And we're going to get to that later in the show. But first, I did want to talk about an Orioles roster move and a waiver claim that they made, because the Orioles brought home an old friend over the weekend as they claimed right-handed pitcher Brooks Kriske off waivers from the Cincinnati Reds. Now, Kriske still did have options, so the O's did send him immediately to AAA Norfolk and didn't have to clear a big league roster spot for him, but that does not mean he won't help the O's at some point this season. Now, Kriske was DFA'd by the Reds last week, was pitching in AAA all season with Cincinnati after he had signed a minor league deal with the Reds this offseason. Now, the reason why he was on the 40-man roster in the first place and had to be DFA'd, even though he signed a minor league deal, is that he had an opt-out in his minor league contract for June 17th, where he had to be added to the 40-man roster, but didn't necessarily have to be put on the big league club. So on June 17th, the Reds actually added him to the 40-man, but never called him up, just continued to have him pitch out of the AAA bullpen, and then just needed a 40-man spot last week and decided that Kriske, I'm going to keep saying Brooks Kriske, but it's Brooks Kriske was the guy that they let go. Now, in terms of his stats in AAA Louisville for the Cincinnati Reds system this year, he's been pretty great. 42 appearances, 49 1/3 innings. Now, he only has one save. He hasn't really been their closer. He's been more the setup man in AAA for the Reds, and he's got a 3.10 ERA with a 41% ground ball rate. The strikeout stuff has been incredible. A 37% strikeout rate for Kriske is one of the best among AAA relievers. However, that comes with a fairly concerning 15% walk rate. And that's one of the big reasons why, despite that K rate, he is still in AAA. And even for a Reds team that needs some relievers and hasn't been very good this year, was never called up to the big league level, and they rather would DFA him than call him up. But it's still been a good AAA season. And let's talk about what he brings to the table in terms of his pitch mix, because for Kriske, it is some stuff that, quite honestly, is very impressive for what he can do, at least with his off-speed stuff. So let's begin with the pitch mix. It is at least what Baseball Savant and their minor league StatCast calls a 4-pitch mix. And if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel now, as I am trying to get my right thing up in front of you, that'll be up in a moment as we deal with some technical difficulties, but we roll along. You'll see here, though, that he's got a 4-pitch mix. And now it's interesting, and this chart I'm going to show here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And again, make sure you are like, commenting, and subscribing to Locked On Orioles on YouTube. As you can see it right here, it classifies it as a splitter, a four-seamer, a slider, and a changeup. Now, he might have a little tweak between his splitter and his true changeup, but those pitches are going to do similar things. So let's start with the splitter. This is his main pitch, the pitch he is known for. He throws it 35% of the time, and opponents in AAA are hitting 0.77 against Kriske's splitter. Let me say that again. 0.77 with a 43% swing and miss rate and a 29% hard hit rate. That is ridiculous how good that splitter has been. Then you add it into a slider, which has been almost as good for Kriske. Really the splitter to lefties and righties, and then the slider more so to righties. He throws that thing about 23% of the time. Opponents are hitting just 148 against his slider with a 52% swing and miss rate and a 26% hard hit rate. Basically, all of those levels are elite for Brooks Kriske. Then they have him with a changeup at a 16% usage. That tells me the changeup's a little different than the splitter, probably a different grip, a little bit different movement profile, but it's still almost as good. 121 average, 47% swing and miss rate, 17% hard hit rate. Those three off-speed deliveries have basically been untouchable for AAA hitters. Now, you may be wondering, with all that stuff, Connor, how is he not back in the big leagues? Well, number one, the command's been an issue. I mentioned a 15% walk rate. And number two, you still got to throw a fastball. And although his fastball is not his number one pitch, his four-seamer, he throws it about 27% of the time. It is his only fastball. If you add up the changeup and splitter, that is about a 52% usage between those two pitches. Opponents in AAA have hit 417 with a 792 slugging percentage against Kriske's four-seam fastball, which averages about 93 miles an hour on the season. That is not good at all. And that's where it lies. It's like, can you get away just throwing splitters and sliders? And when you have to throw a fastball, knowing it's going to get clobbered most of the time, can you pitch like that in the big leagues? And the Reds thought no, and the Orioles think maybe. And for Kriske, he has pitched in the big leagues before. It's not like this is something he's never done. And again, he had options. So the Orioles sent him immediately to AAA. It's not like they're going to be calling on him tomorrow, but he has been in the big leagues before. He was drafted by the Yankees in the 6th round all the way back in 2016, and then made his big league debut with the Yankees in the shortened 2020 season. Then late in 2021, he was DFA'd by the Yankees, and he was claimed by the Orioles. That's why I said old friend Brooks Kriske. He pitched in 4 games for the O's in September of 2021. They kind of claimed him it was literally 2 weeks before the season was over. They claimed Kriske in 2021. 4 appearances, 3 2/3, 5 runs, 5 hits, 4 Ks, no walks, and 2 home runs. And then that offseason, he was not a free agent. He was going to stay with the Orioles, but he requested his release from the O's. And the O's granted him his release in November because he wanted to sign a guaranteed deal for more money with a team in Japan. And he went and did that and actually pitched in Japan in 2022 and 23 before coming back to the States and pitching for the Royals a bit last year. But he's pitched in 21 2/3 big league innings with the O's, Yankees, and Royals. It's an 11.22 big league ERA. And even though the strikeout stuff has been there, he's walked a lot of guys and he's given up home runs. But the stuff is there. And this is certainly another project for the Orioles, and it is a guy who they've had in their system, pitched for their big league team before. While Mike Elias and this front office staff were here, they liked Kriske once, and they certainly like him again here in 2024. And again, it's low risk because he does have options. You can just stick him in AAA for the rest of the year as depth and never call him up, and that's what he's going to be. He'll be depth in AAA. The Orioles will try to tweak something, probably not with the splitter and the slider because they've been so good, but they'll try to tweak something with that fastball to at least make it closer to major league average and usable at the big league level, something they did with Colin Selby. And then we saw how good his first 2 outings as an Oriole were last week in New York. When he had really good off speeds, they could do the exact same thing here with 30-year-old right-hander Brooks Kriske. Again, I'm not saying he's going to play a big role, but he's depth And if the O's need another guy, they could absolutely go and pull Kriske up. And if he throws that splitter, I mean, that thing, when he was, again, it was 4 games for a terrible Orioles team in 2021 in September, but I was hosting this podcast back then. And you can go back to a September episode and an off-season episode back in 2021 where I talked about Kriske. And I talked back then, like, the Orioles can't let this guy go. I was in love with that splitter, in love with the stuff he showed in just those 4 outings. And the O's apparently loved him enough to bring him back and have him as some depth here this season. And again, I would not be surprised at all if he pitches for the Orioles out of the bullpen at some point, because, hey, they are trying to find some more high leverage arms to help this pen down the stretch, at least until, they get Jacob Webb back and they get Danny Coulombe back and they get a little bit healthier in terms of the arms. Now, to make room for Brooks Kriske, the Orioles did have a full 40-man roster and they DFA'd Nick Vespi. Now, this has been something that it's kind of been writing on the wall for Vespi, who has appeared in the big leagues each of the last 3 seasons for the Orioles, but it was only 12 1/3 innings this year after only 14 2/3 innings in Baltimore last year after he played a much bigger role, not a huge role, but a much bigger role in the Orioles bullpen in his rookie year in 2022. He's just been the prototypical up-down man. This was his final option year, so that chance for the O's to send him up and down frequently was going to be gone if he was back in 2025. The stuff has kind of played down a little bit when he's been here this year. And remember, he used to go down and just dominate AAA and then come back up to the big leagues and be okay. That kind of changed this year as well. Vespi's got a 7.71 ERA in AAA Norfolk this season. So you can tell some of it's just like getting bored of pitching in AAA, but a little bit the stuff has fallen off a bit for the left-hander. And it was an uphill battle with the stuff because his fastball is at best 90-mile-an-hour pitch with some cut movement. Now for Vespi, because he's had his struggles this year, there's a good chance he does not get claimed on waivers and the Orioles get to keep him and just outright him off the 40-man and keep him in AAA in Norfolk in the bullpen and still be a depth option if the O's would need it down the stretch of this season. But because of where he was and where the O's roster is, more than likely he was going to be a 40-man crunch and be DFA'd this offseason anyway. So the O's found a chance to maybe do it now and hope he can slip through waivers, which is the same thing that happened to Bruce Zimmerman. When the O's made those roster moves last week, Zimmerman was DFA'd and he did officially clear waivers. So he is off the 40-man, but does stay in the AAA Norfolk rotation and in the Orioles organization. I would expect similar for Vespi, but he's a little more enticing for another team to claim than Bruce was. So we shall see if Vespi does stay with the Orioles. But hey, it would be nice for him if he latched on with another team and they gave him a more of a solidified run in the big leagues. But I'm just not sure with the way he's been pitching recently that will happen right now. But that's kind of the Orioles news off the bat at the top of the episode. Now let's get to what I really wanted to talk about today, and that is Craig Kimbrel. It has been a large topic of discussion among Orioles fans over the past few weeks, and I've touched on it many a time, especially when he's been pitching in games here and there and in different kind of spots, certainly not in the closer role for the Orioles. But I want to dedicate the rest of this episode really to Craig Kimbrel, how bad it's been versus how good it was early in the year, and what the Orioles' options are for him right now, and what they could do and should do with Kimbrel down the stretch of this 2024 season as they try and go out there and win a division here in September. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk about FanDuel a lot, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little bit different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Listen, that is a fantastic deal. With football season coming up, you don't want to miss out on that. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. So for the O's, there's been a bit of a Craig Kimbrel issue lately. We all know it. We've all watched it happen. There's been the ebbs and flows. Let's talk about it now for Kimbrel. Again, these are stats entering Sunday, as I mentioned earlier. His full season, 51 appearances, 46 2/3 innings for the Orioles for the 36-year-old, a 3.86 ERA with a 4.29 FIP. He's got still a pretty elite strikeout rate at 33%. His walk rate, though, at 13% is the second highest of any full season in his big league career. Only back in 2016 with Boston did he walk more batters. He also struck out more batters that year and did much better at avoiding hard contact and just had an overall better season that year with the Red Sox. And there's multiple layers to what to do here with Craig Kimbrel, but specifically, it's been really bad in the second half, and he has not really been in a save spot in a while now. The last time he got one was when he blew that 3-run save in Miami. That was kind of it. He got the 9th inning the next day in a tie game. And since then, it just hasn't been any kind of normal closer-ish role for Craig Kimbrel. He's gotten into a few high leverage spots since then, but nothing where like the 9th is his to keep it tied or close it out. And in total, since the All-Star break, it's been 9 earned runs on 13 hits allowed in 11 1/3 innings, 13 Ks, 10 walks, a hit batter, and 4 home runs allowed in that stretch. And the issue has been not just the walks, 10 and 11 1/3 innings bad, not just the 4 homers. He's been a long ball machine. It's also been what the stuff has looked like. And just for this full season, his average fastball velocity is 93.9 miles per hour, by far the lowest of any season in his career. Now, some of that is not surprising. He is 36 years old. He is clearly on the downtrend of his career. The Orioles knew that when they signed him to the 1-year deal in the offseason to kind of fill in for Felix Bautista this year. They knew that. They knew the velocity had been going down year over year. It took kind of a bigger jump this year. But you know you're not going to get 97, 98 Craig Kimbrel. That's not what he's been for a long time. But this is much lower. And in the month of August, it is down to a 92.9 miles per hour average fastball velocity. That is the lowest of any single month of his career. And for pretty much almost every month this year, it's been dropping month to month, that fastball velocity. That is not a good sign. Obviously, the runs he's giving up and the fact that he's out of the closer role, that's not a good sign for him. But overall, for how this looks in the future, even just for the next month with the Orioles and for Kimbrel's future career, if he wants to continue pitching into 2025 and beyond, the velocity being that low is not good. And he can still get guys out. Like, I've got some charts here. Again, if you're watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, you can see here, this is Craig Kimbrel in 2024. This is courtesy of StatCast and Baseball Savant. This is swing and miss percentage on just places in and around the strike zone. And you can see when he gets that fastball up high, it's still like in the strike zone, but up. He's got whiff rates above 40%. You get it up and out of the zone, he's well above 50%. So if he can locate that fastball, even though he's been, 94 instead of 96 this year, that 94 with that high spin rate that Kimbrel has that makes the fastball almost look like it's rising on you, no matter what velocity he's throwing it at. If he can still locate it at the top of the zone, it's still good. And we still see him getting swings and misses at the top of the zone. The issue is the command has also taken a step back along with the velocity. Now, he's never been a command artist really at any point in his career. He's always sprayed the ball around a little bit. But as I mentioned, second highest walk rate of a full season in his career, it's taken another step in the wrong direction in terms of his fastball command. And you see when the ball leaks down to the lower part of the zone or the middle of the zone, those whiff rates, you got nothing higher than like 20%. That is not good. And Kimbrel's been a guy throughout his career who has always been generally hit hard on average, but he's been so good because he rarely gets hit. He avoided contact so well that if 1 out of every 5 batters hits a hard ball off me, that's okay because I feel like I'm striking out the other 4. That was the, lockdown Hall of Fame closer part of Craig Kimbrel's career. Now we're at the point where he's not whiffing as much and the command is having the ball leak down in the zone and guys are hitting it. And when they hit it, this has been the case 10 years ago and now, they hit it hard. And that is a true issue. But the question is, how much different is this from last year? Well, I just showed again, here's that 2024 whiff rate. Now let's go to the 2023 whiff zones. It wasn't a banner season for Kimbrel last year with the Phillies. I think overall he was a little bit better and they trusted him at least until they got to the NLCS in the playoffs. But you can see the whiff rates here and they're still very good up in the zone. But look at them as they go lower in the zone. Even lower in the zone, he's got whiff rates, in the higher 20s, in the 30s, in the middle of the zone. What that tells you right there is that the higher velocity fastball, when he was missing last year, was still playing better if he missed his spot when he was trying to go up, and he could still get outs in the middle of the zone or still get outs low in the zone. Now, as we flip back to 2024, you see all that blue. He just can't do it anymore. And I think a lot of that is because of the lowered velocity. Listen, 94 is a big difference from 95 or 96, especially when you're throwing it in the middle of the plate. So what does it all mean? Well, here's a 2024 chart again, and these are the slugging percentages against Kimbrel's pitches. And again, you see when he throws the ball up in the strike zone, guys don't slug it at all. If he throws it up and away or up and in, they basically don't hit it still, even though he's throwing 93. But look what happens when he gets into the middle of the zone. Those slugging percentages get up among the 400s and 500s, and things get unfortunate for Craig Kimbrel. So basically, what am I saying? He can still be good with this velocity. Now, it's harder for him to be good, but he can still be good with this velocity. His issue is he can't lose the command too. You can lose one of the two. If the velocity stayed with a little worse command, he could still be good. If he still had good command, but the velocity slipped a bit, he could still be good because of that high spin rate. But he's lost them both a little bit at the same time, and that's why it's gotten so bad. 93 down the middle, it can't play. 93 at the top can play. 95 down the middle can play for Craig Kimbrel, but he's not getting either. So the question kind of becomes now, what do you do after you see all that? What do you do with Craig Kimbrel? I think there are three options that the Orioles can do with Craig Kimbrel right now as we sit here. Number one is you just kind of let him try to figure it out again. And this is what the Orioles did early in the season. Remember, he had that bad stretch. He blew the 2 saves against the A's. He had the back troubles. They, gave him like 4 or 5 days of rest. Then they started easing him back in. Now, he didn't necessarily pitch in low leverage spots when he came back. It was more like, hey, we're winning by a couple of runs, but you'll get the 6th or the 7th for a few weeks instead of the 9th. And then they just eased him back in towards the 9th inning. And he pitched really well, and it worked out great. Kimbrel even said publicly, like he was buying into, he understood why the Orioles were doing it. It honestly worked out fantastically. And he came back to get to the point where he had a run of 22 appearances where in 21 of them, he did not allow an earned run. That's how good he was for like a 2-month stretch once the Orioles started easing him back in and then inserted him back into that closer role. So you could try it again. You could continue to kind of pitch him fairly regularly in these like low-ish leverage situations where you give him some spots where it's like, hey, 2-run lead in the 7th, 3-run lead in the 8th. Craig, go out there and maybe it looks better and better. And then you ease him back into a save spot in the 9th inning. And maybe you could, they gave him like a 4 or 5 day rest last time. Maybe you put him on an IL stint. You give him a 15-day IL stint. He's 36. He's had back issues earlier this year. The velocity is down. It would be very easy to say something's wrong enough to go on the injured list. You just give him a 2-week break. He can rest his arm. He can work on some things. And then you come back and ease him back in. That could be part of that plan number one. Number two is you could make some sort of change with the pitch mix and what he's throwing. So he was at times this year throwing a little more of a sweeper. He actually threw 2 of them in his outing on Friday night when he did put up a 0 against the Astros. And you can just have him throw more of a sweeper and his breaking ball more often at times. So you could switch up the pitch mix. And that's a little bit what he did on Friday. And I mentioned it on yesterday's episode, but Kimbrel, when, he got a couple of strikeouts, let a couple runners on, but did put up a 0. Now it was low leverage. The O's were down 5-2 in the top of the 8th on Friday, but he was the winning pitcher because Santander hit the grand slam in the bottom of the 8th. But Kimbrel went in there and he threw more breaking balls than we have seen all season. 15 breaking balls were thrown by Craig Kimbrel. That tied for the most breaking balls he has ever thrown in any appearance in his career. That is how many curveballs and a couple of sweepers we saw from Kimbrel. That is clearly a change in pitch mix and philosophy from Kimbrel on the mound. And that's a good sign. That tells me, okay, the Orioles and Drew French and Mitch Plasmeyer and all these guys are working with Kimbrel and he's making some sort of change. There's also that changeup, right? That changeup, I talked about it in spring training when he was throwing it. It's a changeup for the last 5-6 years that he's been working on in spring training, debuted it in regular season games a few times, but it's never really stuck to it to add a third pitch besides his fastball and his knuckle curve. So maybe you could put him on the IL, have him work on the changeup and come back with a third pitch that could help him get lefties out, maybe help him get a few more ground balls, which would be helpful because he's getting hit so hard. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher. Some more grounders would certainly help him out. That could work. I mean, this is the worst stretch he's had at times in his career. Maybe this is the time to make a big change, like adding a third pitch that you've always toyed around with. And then there's the third option. And the third option is you just cut him loose. You DFA him, you release him. I think he has a little more leash, and the Orioles have shown that by the fact that they're still using him out there, not the highest leverage scenarios, but still using him to get outs. But if the velo stays at he's been throwing some pitches at 92. If the velo stays at 92 and he's still not throwing strikes, or when he is, he's spraying it around the strike zone, leaving it down or in the middle of the plate and giving up homers. Like if it's looking, and the last couple of outings have been better, which is good. But if it's looking like it did for that stretch like a week or two ago, and it was like you threw him in there, and that game against the Red Sox where it looked like batting practice, that game that he threw last Friday night against Boston. If it's looking like that for, the next week or two, and the Orioles just can't even touch him anything close to high leverage, and he's just like wasting away and not helping them in the middle of a September race for the AL East title, you maybe just cut him loose. Like that's a possibility. I don't think we're here yet as we sit here in August, but it is a possibility of just cutting your losses and giving his spot to a guy who could at least, like a guy like Brooks Kriske, who could maybe pitch some big outs, whereas at this point, Kimbrel won't. I'm not saying that's the case now, but it could come up. Now, for me, I think number one is most likely of just letting him figure it out, although the O's are maybe leaning towards number two with throwing more breaking balls on Friday night. And what would I do? I would do option number two. That is making a change. So whether it is continuing to throw more curveballs, more sweepers until he gets that fastball command back, or whether it's adding in that changeup, I'm totally on board for that. It's not a brand new pitch. He's always thrown it in spring training and always toyed around with it for like the past decade of his big league career. I'm in for that because there is still, even with the velo down, the stuff of an all-star closer in there for Craig Kimbrel. We saw it earlier this year. He arguably should have been an all-star this season. Like Clay Holmes is an all-star. Kimbrel's been better than him, at least for most of the year. It's still in there, I think. And sometimes in the postseason, a hot reliever, a group of three hot relievers can carry you. We certainly saw it with the Rangers last year. We saw it with the Nats in 2019. You shrink your bullpen to the guys pitching well, and some guys just randomly get hot. We saw Kimbrel get hot. I mentioned that stretch from May to July, 22 appearances, 21 of them without an earned run. If he could do that again closer to the postseason, you could turn it back over to them. And maybe he's never the closer again this year, but at the very least, he's got to be able to help you in some way, in something close to high leverage. The Orioles will need that from him. And it's not like you have, this bullpen of arms in AAA just chomping at the bit to throw high leverage eighth inning pitches and get strikeouts in the majors if the O's move on from Kimbrel. Like with that elite strikeout rate, which is the best in the Orioles bullpen, even with the struggles, it's hard to argue that he's not one of their best 8 relief options that they have in the system healthy right now. Like, I don't think you can argue against that point. So that's kind of where we are with Kimbrel. You just got to hope and work to get him better. Now, and maybe if Jacob Webb and Danny Coulomb come back healthy and look good, and Gregory Soto figures it out and gets right, then maybe there's enough good pieces that Kimbrel does get pushed out, where maybe even if he doesn't get released, he just gets moved to super low leverage and like they don't put him on the playoff roster. The Dodgers did that a couple of years where he was pitching in high leverage all year, then struggled in September, and they just left him off the postseason roster. That's a possibility as well for the Orioles. And Sir Anthony Dominguez is certainly the Orioles closer right now. It is not Craig Kimbrel, and there's a good chance it's Dominguez for the rest of the year, and it's not Kimbrel. But if Kimbrel can get to a point where it's back to the 6th and 7th and you can trust him a little bit, that would be huge for this O's team. But what would I do? I'd keep with the more breaking balls, maybe add the changeup and just see if it can work. Because as bad as it's been at times, again, you need to miss bats in the postseason. And nobody misses bats in this Oriole bullpen statistically better than Craig Kimbrel. And I think for me, that's at least holding on to for a little longer and just seeing maybe if he can get back close to his normal self. But that's the Kimbrel thoughts. Let me know in the comments here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. What would you do with Craig Kimbrel as we move down the stretch of this O's season? Got a couple of housekeeping podcast notes to get to finish off the pod on this Tuesday episode coming up right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Supply House. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. And pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free TradeMaster program. Every TradeMaster gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at supplyhouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at supplyhouse.com. So to finish off the pod today, just wanted to get to a couple of housekeeping notes as we sit here on a Tuesday. Going to be a little bit of a different podcast schedule this week. If you've been with the show for a long time, first of all, thank you so much for sticking with us as we get down the stretch here in the season. You know, because I do work a separate full-time job, when the Orioles go on the West Coast during the week, it is really, really tough for me to keep up the level of coverage that I do at other times on a daily basis. And the Orioles, after the off day Monday, they go to LA. They are taking on the Dodgers for a 3-game series starting tonight, and all 3 games are starting at 10:10 p.m. Eastern time. And because of that, I am just not able to record an episode after that game ends at 1 a.m., get it all up for you, go to bed, have a good night's sleep, go to work, come back, do another podcast. It's just unfortunately impossible to do that. So because of that, I am still going to have episodes this week, but they are going to look a little different. So this episode dropping here on Tuesday morning. Here tonight, Tuesday night, I'm going to do a live mailbag episode here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. So make sure you're commenting, and subscribing. It's probably going to be around 8 p.m. Eastern time, but look for the announcement on the YouTube page for the precise time. But it's going to be a live mailbag. What does that mean? Hop in the comments, ask your questions. I'll be answering questions for 30 or so minutes. And the plan is going to be something close to that for episodes Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night. You'll get to listen to them live and early on YouTube, and then they'll be posted to your favorite audio listening platform the next morning. So for example, tonight's live mailbag will go live on YouTube and then be on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify on Wednesday morning, and kind of counting as my Wednesday episode. Now, I may potentially jump in on Friday and kind of recap the entire Dodgers series, because unfortunately all 3 games are at 10. And you'll hear a little bit from me each day, like the evening after a game of a series, if something big happens for the O's. And I'll get to any news and notes and anything happening on those episodes as well. But again, look for a live mailbag tonight. Won't be your usual, you wake up and there's a recap of the game, just not able to do it. So we'll talk about some other things. They'll still be related to this O's season. They'll still be very important with this stretch run, but just because of the timing, other things in life, just not able to do it. Luckily, this is the final West Coast road trip during the week of the season. So we'll be back to regular programming next week on the pod. But still join us on the live mailbag tonight. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.